Say it.
Hi everybody, welcome to the bonus round. This is just a little tiny secondary show we wanted to do for you. We kind of already explained the premise on one of the episodes of the podcast, but this episode is pre-recorded, so it's not broadcast live. And we're aiming to kind of put these out on weeks where we're not able to do the podcast. So we're going to record them kind of in little bursts throughout the year and then put them out when we need to. The premise of the show is very simple. We have a small list of prompts that we've compiled. We put them into a random, like, internet choice generating wheel, I guess.
Random number generator decision maker thing.
Exactly, and it picks the topic for us of the ones that we gave it. So today, the topic is favorite game composers.
Yeah.
There's a lot of composers working in video games.
Yes, I think most notably, and one that we can agree on is a top tier, is of course Mr. Shoji Meguro.
Yeah, so Shoji Meguro is pretty well regarded. He's maybe one of the most well-known composers in like the sphere of JRPGs. He's mostly known for his work with the Megami Tensei series.
Yeah,
including
Persona.
Yeah, the Shin Megami Tensei stuff, Persona, and its myriad of spin-offs. But he's been in the game for a long time. He's been composing for them, I'm pretty sure, since the first Shin Megami Tensei.
Since the first Persona.
Oh, since the first Persona, okay.
Yeah.
Well then, what happened is, he started with the first Persona, and then they brought him over to do the mainline Megami Tensei games afterwards. Mm-hmm. So he's kind of like Atlus's go-to composer for that series now. I'll be honest, I think he's kind of a hard composer to pin down. He doesn't really have a noticeable style to him. Like, he's kind of a musical chameleon.
Yeah.
But I think that's what makes him interesting.
Yeah, it changes so much from game to game that, like, he has a certain sound that you're like, this is Shoji, but, like, the genre per se is almost never the same. You just look at the jump between Persona 4 and Persona 5.
Yeah, that's true. It's a shift from, I guess we could call Persona 4 like very slick, nicely produced like J-pop.
Yeah.
To with like a bit of like an electronic kind of underground dance vibe going for it, and then immediately to 5 it shifts to like a very big band, almost electro swing. Mm-hmm. It changes like to suit, I guess, the context of the games that he's like recording for. Like 5, of course, it has like a Phantom Thief aesthetic.
Yeah,
and so the soundtrack goes to like the big band stuff that you'd hear in like a Loop on the Third movie. You know, something like that.
He really he blends into whatever the aesthetic and tone of the game is very well. And it's not even just the game in general, like moments in the game. There's lighthearted moments where the music is fun and lighthearted and very light, and like some of the Persona endgame boss fight music or like final dungeon music, you know, is really it gets the point across that it is a dire situation.
Yeah, like he starts blending kind of orchestral sounds with there's always a bit of a heavy metal influence to some of his stuff, especially during Endgame. But yeah, the orchestral Gregorian chant kind of music. Actually, chanting is something that I think he incorporates really, really well into his music, because there's always kind of the underlying deific or like Judeo-Christian themes to the Megami Tensei series.
Yeah.
So it always gives him an excuse to incorporate, Christian music and elements of like traditional Christian music into his work. Actually, one of my favorite examples of this and the use of chants is his soundtrack for Shin Megami Tensei Strange Journey for the Nintendo DS. That soundtrack is almost primarily composed of, orchestral music with chanting vocal accompaniment. There's very little outside of kind of that specific kind of music in the game, but it's used to like varying degrees very effectively to convey both kind of the softer, lighter character moments within the story, and just like the grave experience that is trekking through these like multiple rounds of this demonic like time warp that you're stuck in. So like every layer of this time warp that you're in has like a different theme to it, and they're kind of based on the different sins. And the first one, for instance, is Wrath, and so it's this massive kind of battlefield in like Sengoku era Japan, and the music is just really, it's really dire. It gets across kind of the environment that you're in, being this like bloody, war-torn like city, and then like the next layer of world that you go to is this big, I guess it's like this big open field with a huge tower in the center, and the tower is like a pleasure tower, so this is like the sin of lust. And the music is just equally threatening and kind of sinister, but there's also kind of this alluring element to it as you draw closer and into the tower. He's just a really fantastic composer. His music is, at least in my opinion, some of the most like unparalleled stuff you can. Oh, and I can't set aside just how much I love the Persona 3 soundtrack.
Oh god, no,
I think I have listened to the Persona 3 soundtrack more times than I've actually played Persona 3.
It's one of those ones that's ingrained in your memory.
Yeah, like
for
from
me too.
everything from the theme song, Burn My Dread, which is like a great blend of like R&B, neo-soul kind of stuff, directly into a chorus that's just straight up like hard rock, heavy metal. Really fucking cool. Beautiful soundtrack. And of course, like the themes for the different areas of Tokyo that you're in, like the themes for the different stations, having so much kind of like this peppy kind of hip-hop energy. It's a very hip-hop soundtrack, soul, hip-hop, R&B, with like a slight incorporation of metal.
Not Flying Lotus, fucking Lotus Juice.
Yes,
doing vocals on a lot of those tracks in 3 also.
Absolutely.
He also did the soundtrack for Catherine, which is one of my... It's up there with Persona 3 in terms of, like, amazing video game soundtracks.
Catherine's a game that I don't even like, and I think the soundtrack is fucking brilliant. Like, it's stellar, and once again, incorporates a lot of elements of, like, kind of Christian music because of the themes of the game.
Yeah.
It seems like maybe that's kind of his recurring theme, but I don't know, because outside of his work with the Megami Tensei series, I don't know if he incorporates those elements, except for with the exception of Catherine. But a lot of the games he works with, or a lot of the games Atlas makes, tend to kind of lean into that Judeo-Christian aesthetic with kind of the characters, because it's like a preferred aesthetic of a lot of Japanese companies when they produce media, because it's very exotic to them in the way that like Greek mythology is exotic to us.
Yeah.
Which is funny considering that there are Christians in Japan, even though they represent a pretty small minority. But it's just the way that it's used, even like in Evangelion, the liberal use of Judeo-Christian imagery, kind of mythologizing and adding greater, I guess, gravitas to the stuff going on in the series proper. But yeah, Meguro makes very good use of that stuff in his music. Another composer that I really like, and I'm sure you like him too, because you probably heard a couple of his soundtracks, is Chip Tanaka, or Hirokazu Tanaka. He is he's a composer that's been working for Nintendo for a very long time. He did everything from like the sound programming on early Game & Watch games.
Oof, okay, yeah, I just just looked at his wiki, and that's a list of games.
Early Game & Watch titles to some of my favorite soundtracks ever composed for gaming. But his work within the 8-bit era specifically is stuff that, like, I think he's almost unparalleled in the realms of composing 8-bit music. So he did the soundtrack for Metroid, which I'm sure you're intimately familiar with, the first Metroid soundtrack.
It is ingrained in my brain.
What a fucking incredible piece of music the soundtrack to that game is. It's almost like an orchestral suite that
in
kind
8-bit.
In 8-bit that you kind of descending the levels of Zebes, going towards Torian, like the music shifting from kind of an energetic, adventurous tone to more dire and more mechanical and more haunted, until you finally reach Torian, and the music is just like swelling to like this level that's, it's like I said, just it's really mechanical, really haunting. It kind of gets across to you like the artificiality and like monstrous technology that you're confronting, like all these the Metroids and stuff that are running rampant down there. Of course, the Metroid theme music, the da-na-na, da-na-na, da-na-na. Just like three fucking chords, and those chords are all you need to kind of communicate the tone of the series. Amazing. Like it's a revelation. Another soundtrack that he did, which is kind of it's the game that I kind of consider Metroid's brother to an extent because of how they were released together on the Famicom Disk System, Kid Icarus, and that soundtrack is radically different from Metroid's. Metroid's is very science fiction.
Kid Icarus is very fantasy.
It's very fantastical. It's got kind of the inklings of like a horn section going on. The underworld theme is like iconic video game music, and of course it propels the game forward because a lot of the game is it's a long-winded solo adventure game, kind of like Metroid, but it progresses really differently from the way Metroid does. But it shares a lot of elements like vertical progression through a vertical scrolling plane, and like then switching to horizontal progression, flying levels, stuff like that. Like it also incorporates kind of, I want to say like the score or scoring elements that you would hear in like a Ray Harryhausen sword and sandal fantasy movie.
Yeah,
like a 60s or 70s, even 50s, like a Sinbad movie or a Jason and the Argonauts, like a triumphant adventure film score. But it's really radically different from any of the shit you heard in Metroid, and then of course even his earlier work. And then you get to like the real gem of his NES soundtrack work, and that's the soundtrack for Mother.
Yeah,
which is my favorite. It's my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. The Mother soundtrack is like, it's fucking weird. I mean, Mother as a series is fucking weird, and it incorporates like a bunch of really strange, disparate elements together. It's equally a story that kind of sets itself in this idyllic Americana setting, right?
Yeah,
and then the music you hear is kind of a mix of rock and roll with a little bit of science fiction movie, like B-movie kind of music.
Some bits it dips into horror movie kind of.
Absolutely, and with a lot of kind of disparate and atonal sounds being used.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's almost like aggressively non-melodic, which I find really, really fun, because I like music that's really aggressive and loud and kind of raucous and cacophonic. And there's multiple battle themes for different sets of enemies. And then, of course, music plays a huge part in the game's plot, because the first Mother, and the second Mother, and the third Mother, actually, all three of them, music is really vital to the game's identities, but especially in the first two games, you're collecting 8 magical melodies from across the world, and these melodies and the melodies themselves are like these. It's a beautifully composed piece of music. You've got, da na 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 na. That's the first melody. Da na 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 na. The second melody. Da na 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 na. The third melody. Dun 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 dun. The fourth melody. Da na na na. The fifth melody. Da na 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 na. The sixth melody. And then dun 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 dun. The seventh melody, and then dun na na na. The eighth melody. And that, not only do they work separately as kind of different pieces of music, but when they're synthesized together towards the end of the game in the music for like the climactic battle with Jig, who's like the main villain.
Yeah.
Also, lots of music names. I mean, the main villain's name is Jig, which is to say he's like his name is a genre of music. the way that that's incorporated into the story is brilliant, because Zig's entire storyline, or his entire reason for coming back to Earth to destroy it, is because Zig lost his mother, his surrogate mother, who was a human. And so he wants to exact revenge on the planet Earth and find his mother again. And the only way to quell Zig's wrath is to sing to him the song that his mother would sing to him to rock him to sleep. And that's
so he goes to bed.
Yeah. So that's the 8 melodies. And I think that's, not only is that a really beautiful and kind of intimate way to defeat a villain, like completely non-violently, which is very much within the ethos of the Mother series, being it's mostly about friendship and love and affection. And like a love for humanity, but just a beautiful sentiment backed up by a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah,
it's so crucial to the story of that game. So yeah, Hirokazu Tanaka, of course, he went on to compose the soundtrack for Mother 2. He composed the soundtrack for Super Mario Land, a game which I've raved about on the podcast before.
Yeah,
and
we
that
actually talked about it when you talked about Super Mario Land.
Yeah, that soundtrack it's stellar. It sounds really, really good, and there's like a beautiful version.
It's as
of it
weird as the game.
Yeah, and there's like a beautiful like band recorded version of the album that you can find. Similarly with the Mother soundtrack, there's a beautiful version of that soundtrack that's the original version, I should say, that has been re-released a couple times, and it's all just that music recorded by a full studio band with vocalists and everything accompanying it.
Shit.
And the final track on the Mother album is actually like a almost 30-minute long suite of every musical theme from the game in its 8-bit form. It's beautiful. It's a great argument for like the validity of 8-bit music as art music or high music.
Consoles or Super Soul Brothers, I can't remember which one, but they do a cover album of like most, if not all, of the Mother music. Maybe it's just like one game from, I think it's from 3, actually.
Yes. Mother 3 has a brilliant soundtrack by Shogo Sakai, who's a fantastic composer in his own right, who I won't talk about because that's a lot about Mother. And we need to move on to other composers.
Mother. I want to give a big ups to Christopher Larkin, a composer from Australia who did the music for Hollow Knight and the upcoming Silk Song game also. Which is the second, the sequel to Hollow Knight.
I'm excited to play the first Hollow Knight, but I want to play that sequel too. I've never listened to the music from Hollow Knight, so I want to hear what it's like.
The music from Hollow Knight is literally, I think it's one of my favorite video game albums, in the sense that it brings across the feeling of aloneness that you have in the world of Hollow Knight. It's kind of the same as we just talked about, the Metroid sci-fi feeling of isolation. Every area has its own kind of song, and they all kind of flow really well into each other. I think my favorite that I've seen so far, because I'm still not done with the game because there is too many things. But City of Tears, you find this lost city where it's raining in the underground, and the second I started hearing the music in that area, it was one of those moments where I was like, all right, I'm putting the controller down, I'm gonna turn up the sound and just sit back and take it in for a couple of minutes, because it's really one of the most, like, it's one of my favorite composed pieces in video games, I think. And I'm really excited to see what other songs he did for the DLCs of Hollow Knight, which I have not touched yet, and also for Silk Song. It will be amazing. I'm trying to...
That trailer for Silk Song looks
so
fantastic. It really sold me on wanting to play the game even more.
The sound design in the game, and not just musically, but like
the ADR and audio.
Yeah. You've got the like environmental sounds that go really well with the music too, like the rain tapping on the windows in the City of Tears. You got Crystal Peaks, which is like a mining part of the Hollow Nest.
Yeah.
And the music there is very good, and you just hear pickaxes going away from enemies on the crystals and stuff, and it's really an experience in itself.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I cannot recommend that game enough.
I guess this is related, but don't you love it when a video game soundtrack or not just a soundtrack, but the entire sound design surrounding a game, including its soundtrack, is composed by one person, and everything just synthesizes together so beautifully?
Yeah.
Or when music in itself becomes the environmental sounds for, especially in a lot of 8-bit games, the music is kind of a blending of environmental noise and, a melody or song. You know who does this really well, and this is a good transition? Toby Fox.
Yes, Toby Fox does an amazing... I actually can't believe we didn't bring him up a little earlier.
Yeah, Toby Fox's soundtrack work for both Undertale, Deltarune, and for his Earthbound Halloween hack.
Yeah.
He perfectly... This is something, I guess, that Hirokazu Tanaka, does very, very well. The incorporation of environmental noise and music into the tracks themselves, so that the soundtrack is everything. It's the ADR, it's the sound design, it's the sound effects, and it's... this musical identity of the game. Toby is very much the same. One of my favorite examples is in Undertale when you go to the waterfall. The waterfall area in Undertale has this beautiful, lilting, watery kind of music that really gets across kind of where you are. You hear the water droplets coming from the ceiling because it's kind of a cavern. You hear the river flowing through, and then you hear the water crashing. But then the music is just this soft piano melody playing through the environmental sounds. It's amazing. And similarly, they imbue these areas with a particular energy. A really good example in Deltarune would be the Field of Hopes and Dreams theme.
Oh yeah,
which is amazing.
That because I still have yet to really play Undertale, but I have listened extensively to the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
So I know a lot about the music. I don't really know about the sound effects playing in and adding to the tone, but I can only imagine it is very well done. And as for Deltarune, I think the soundtrack is probably the best part of that game. Not that it's to discredit the game at all. The game is also very good, but I think the highest point of that game is definitely the soundtrack.
I think that it does a really good job. Well, he does this very much well in Undertale too, but the use of leitmotif in his music, so individual themes kind of recurring throughout the game to represent characters and coming in with different kind of tones for these different motifs.
Yeah.
Like Susie's theme, for instance, which is that slow kind of chugging guitar. And then you've got Ralsei's theme and Lancer's. Oh
god, Lancer's is so good too.
A very whimsical, mischievous kind of sound.
The shop owner, the shop music is so good. Not the cat, but the puzzle master.
Yes, which is a fantastic sounding music. No, I love his, and actually, as somebody who loves leitmotifs, I guess we should give big ups to the guy who's really responsible, I think, for the proper incorporation of leitmotif into console video game music, and that's Nobuo Uematsu. I want to say specifically with Final Fantasy IV, that's kind of where you start really hearing, which is, I want to say, my other favorite video game soundtrack of all time, the incorporation of different genres of music into the aesthetic of that game, from like kind of chuggy electronic music to an almost mariachi horn-led battle theme.
Yeah.
And then just the beautiful piano and orchestral music translates beautifully to like the SNES sound chip. And yeah, that's a game that uses heavy use of leitmotif for different characters and recurring themes like Cecil's theme or the Red Wings theme. And how that's used to kind of amp up a scene.
Oh, he did stuff for Chrono Trigger too.
Oh, Uematsu
I was unaware of that. Yeah, he's
he's
every
Square's
JRPG
go-to composer
so far. Yeah,
and almost all JRPG composers owe some level of fealty to him for the work that he did pioneering the use of like classical music themes and leitmotif into video game music. Another quick aside, I guess, small anecdote. When Otakuthon came around a couple years ago, Uematsu attended and brought with him a small chamber orchestra, not led by him, but he was present to perform a couple of themes from the Final Fantasy series, and I was one of the lucky people to go and get in and sit there, and I sat right behind him.
Oh,
like,
nice.
I sat up in right near the front row, in like the second or third row. It must have been the second row, I suppose. And the first row was reserved for people, and I'm like, I wonder who it's reserved for. And I guess, much to my surprise, here comes the head of the North American division of Square Enix and Nobuo Uematsu sitting right in front of me, watching this chamber orchestra play some of like my favorite video game music.
Tap him on the shoulder like, you smell nice.
He smelled very good, actually. I'm not kidding. I'm
not surprised.
He had his long gray hair tied in a ponytail. No, he was very friendly. I got him to sign a CD of mine afterwards.
Nice.
He's a brilliant composer, and I think his work for the Final Fantasy series is rightfully so considered, just some of the best video game music out there. And that's not even like to discuss the music he did for like the later games in the series, for like the PS1 era Final Fantasy games, which have lavish scores that incorporate like genuine CD quality like compositions in. And I was just talking a lot about his 8-bit stuff, and his 16-bit music for like early consoles, but his stuff for the PS1 era Final Fantasy games is like, holy fuck, really, really, really good. And I think he really shines when he's just given every resource possible to make like every musical moment of those games feel like the most important shit ever.
Yeah.
Really, really beautiful stuff that he's done for that. So yeah, he's great. You got anybody else? I know a composer that you're maybe neglecting to mention.
I think I was just about to, but maybe not. We'll see. I tried finding a wiki, but apparently the man is elusive and hasn't really done all that much.
Okay.
So Kiichi Okabe, the composer for Nier Automata, which may be the best video game soundtrack ever made. It is my top one spot, for sure. Everything else is kind of a rotation of how I'm feeling, but the Nier Automata soundtrack was amazing. It did gangbusters with every award that it was nominated for. Surprisingly, he's only done work on Tekken 5, Tekken 6, and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate.
He's done work for Ultimate. That's interesting.
Yeah, that is also...
That's unprecedented. And actually very cool, considering a lot of that music in that game is amazing.
So
it's kind of like a greatest hits of every video game ever made.
He did Drakengard 3, he did Nier the original, and he did Nier Automata, the sequel to Nier, obviously. The music in Nier Automata, specifically, the music in Nier is still really good, but in Nier Automata, it does kind of what Metal Gear Rising Revengeance does, in that like lyrics will kick in after a certain point. The flow of the music into certain areas is really great. Like when you get to the amusement park area, the music kind of starts in very like distant, and as you get closer, you start hearing the instruments more clearly. You start being able to tell the instruments apart. It's not just this like tone in the background. It's like the actual music. And then the vocal track, which is of course nonsensical words, kicks in, but in such a way that is like it just hits you right in the chest.
Yeah,
with
it
how
gets
amazing
you right
it
there.
is. There's also one in particular that is the cutest child la la version of any song. I'll have to send it to you after I find it.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name right now. But it's the most adorable thing, and it's great. There's a bunch of different versions of songs that are in the game too. Like there's a music box version of the camp that you spend most of your time in. You go talk to a guy, and it just starts playing on a music box.
Oh,
and
that's really pretty.
It's really, really pretty. The best in my book, anyway. Not sure if that's who you were suggesting I was going to say, but
I think that was a good get because it isn't who I was suggesting you were going to say, but that's somebody who I wouldn't have thought of, and you're absolutely correct in stating that might be one of the best video game soundtracks of all time. And I say that as somebody who is, to my detriment and to much a great sin, has never played either of the Nier games, but has listened extensively to both of their soundtracks.
Podcast canceled.
Both of those soundtracks are tear-jerkingly beautiful.
Yeah.
And extremely energetic and diverse musically, which is, I guess, maybe something that you can tell we probably both really like in a soundtrack, is just a multitude of different kinds of music being incorporated and synthesized into one succinct package, which is something that almost everything that we've talked about so far does very, very well. Another composer, and I guess just to give some rep to some of the great female composers in gaming that I really admire, that we both really admire, is Yoko Shimomura. I mean, what can be said about Yoko Shimomura that we probably haven't already spoken about at length on the podcast, just with regards to Kingdom Hearts alone? She is like a genius, a musical genius. And you know how I know that she's a musical genius? That she has to find a way to one-up Disney's composers.
Yeah, and does it.
And does it very well. Or not just one-up them, but match them in so many cases where, there's a Disney world and she needs to find a way to musically identify that world in a way that not only keeps in mind the traditions of the Final Fantasy soundtrack and Nobuo Uematsu's stuff, but the scores of those movies that the worlds are coming from. Her work, for instance, in Beast's Castle, again, like one of my favorite Kingdom Hearts worlds of all time, is amazing because it incorporates traditional kind of French gigs into it. Like the theme for the main area is Waltz of the Damned, which is, dun 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 dun, with a pizzicato plucked string sound going for it, and then the score kind of sweeps in. It's beautiful, and not only is that just a brilliant piece of music in its own right, but it's perfect for Beauty and the Beast. It really gets across the feeling of kind of these different objects moving around in cursed locomotion across the castle. The place is like a living, breathing thing. The pizzicato almost sounds like a heartbeat. Dun, 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 dun. It's really brilliant. It really makes that world come to life, and then of course the battle music for that world is really fantastic too, and it's kind of got a dance thing.
I didn't realize she did Street Fighter 2 also.
Yes, so that's what I was going to get to. But not only is she accomplished in Kingdom Hearts, and the fact that she's able to beautifully blend original music with Disney music and Final Fantasy music to synthesize this kind of fantastic, beautiful, and diverse soundtrack. But her work in the fucking 16-bit era is amazing and extensive.
She did the Punisher beat-em-up arcade game.
Yes, she did.
I did not realize that.
And as you mentioned, Street Fighter 2.
Much more than I thought she did.
Yeah, Street Fighter 2 is one of the most iconic fighting game soundtracks of all time. Perhaps the most, in fact. And it did so much to kind of settle the musical identity of a lot of fighting games that followed it. And she is almost single-handedly responsible for that with her soundtrack for Street Fighter 2. And this is the same woman that would later go to compose the entire Kingdom Hearts series?
Yeah.
Are you joking? She's incredibly talented. She like I said, she's a genius.
Yeah.
I really don't like to use that word lightly, but she's truly a genius. She's a multi-talented composer who's worked in so many different mediums and genres, and he's just done multiple. Like, you know, most composers are lucky to have one iconic soundtrack, you know, under their belt, you know, but she's got so many that are so influential and so well regarded by many people. She truly is she's a great successor in many senses to Nobuo Uematsu, even though she's also kind of his contemporary. But she does a lot of the stuff that he does, but she also kind of takes on the elements of those kind of composers who we mentioned were kind of musical chameleons, like Meguro, who can do a bunch of different genres and synthesize them into really good, succinct soundtracks. Oh my god, what a talented composer she is. One of my other absolute favorites. And that's like, I mean, like, without going in and mentioning, you know, the really iconic, you know, composers that everybody thinks about, like Koji Kondo. Yeah. You know, there's so many. We're probably going to have to do another bonus round on music alone.
Oh, for sure.
Just because of how many there are. But yeah. I think that...
Cause I feel like we touched more... we can call this one less of a composer episode and more a soundtrack episode? No, we talked about...
Well, this is more composers than soundtracks,
yeah, it's true, it's true.
But no, it's just like so many... Like, because these are people who, like... You know, whenever you're organizing your music in your music playing... fields or whatever that you use, like I use Media Player just because I'm a Windows bitch, but I have like Windows Media Player and it's like organized perfectly. Not all of my video game soundtracks are organized by composer, but the ones that I mentioned are, because I like to listen to their entire oeuvre together. You know, like I really love kicking back and just giving the entire like musical fucking everything of these people like a full attentive listen. Especially, you know, Nobuo
it's really
Uematsu
worth it too.
Nobuo Uematsu, like the piano collections that they do of his music are on constant rotation. Especially in the evenings when I'm doing work, I love to listen to the Final Fantasy piano collections. They're like, especially the Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy VII piano collections are two of like the best piano, like solo piano like collections you could ever ask for in any sort of composed music. Like they owe, just as those variations of those themes owe as much as much to like fucking Claude Debussy and Eric Satie as they do to the composers who made the music. Just beautifully performed. There's like so many ways to enjoy the work of video game composers. Of course, you can always... If a lot of soundtracks nowadays are released on streaming sites and on Bandcamp, so I would urge people to buy the soundtracks to games if they really enjoy them.
I know I try to as often as possible.
Yeah, same here. And of course, always like support. You just like, you know, support these composers. A lot of them, you know, they deserve to be properly compensated for the work that they put out there. Lena Raine, another good composer. You know, if you want to. I've never played Celeste. I've listened to the Celeste soundtrack so many times. Yeah. And I can't wait to see where she goes next.
Amazing.
I can't wait to listen to what she's got coming up, because I think that that's one of the most magnificently composed pieces of video game music ever. And it's almost entirely piano and like simple arrangements, you know, like they're not complicated pieces of music, but they're beautifully arranged. So she's a stellar composer in her own right. There's just so many great video game composers out there.
I think one last one I want to mention, because it was a very nice renaissance of 8-bit. Jake Kaufman, who did the soundtrack for Shovel Knight.
Yes. Which, that soundtrack to me owes a very, very large amount of its sonic identity to the Mega Man soundtracks.
I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
Because the composer for the Mega Man games, are one of the Manami Matsume, I believe is her name. She helped out with 2 of the tracks in Shovel Knight, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
One of them being the Plague Knight's castle, and the other one being the undersea level, the underwater level where you fight Treasure Knight.
Treasure Knight, yeah. It's Treasure Knight.
Yeah, it's Treasure Knight.
Yeah.
So those two she
wow.
helped out with.
I didn't even know that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it does.
That game has fantastic
soundtrack,
music.
Exactly, is very, very reminiscent of old Mega Man games. It shows, and it is welcome. It is not a ripoff; it is an ode.
Yeah, it's absolutely like a complete tribute and homage to that era of kind of side-scrolling action platformers soundtracks, which many of them, especially the Capcom side-scroller soundtracks, are like considered iconic. Even everything from games like DuckTales to Darkwing Duck, both of which would have like amazing fucking soundtracks, to Bionic Commando, to the entirety of the 8-bit Mega Man series and the 16-bit Mega Man games.
Yeah.
All of which just have stellar music. Mega Man's a series that has very interesting soundtrack work a lot of the time.
Sometimes it's a little overwhelming. Sometimes they went a little too crazy.
That's what I think about a lot of Mega Man soundtracks myself. Sometimes they're.
There's of course Wily's Castle, which is iconic and amazing.
Yeah, Wily Stage 1 from Mega Man 2. Yeah. Fantastic.
And there is also, from Mega Man 2, also Bubble Man's level, I think.
Yeah.
Is a little much.
Woodman I really, really like.
Yeah, Woodman's good. But I meant like in comparison from like the Wily one, which everyone knows, to like some of the less
it's
stellar.
Almost it's as I mentioned, kind of cacophonic, but not in kind of an experimental or narratively driven way. The stuff that you hear in Mother is. It's a little more like it's too busy. Yeah. And there's like a lot of kind of screechy bleeps and bloops going on that maybe they.
It's like okay.
Yeah. It's overwhelming when playing a game as stressful and difficult as those Mega Man games can be. Mega Man 1, I think, has maybe the most consistently good soundtrack of all of them. In that almost the entirety of the game's themes they're very simple melodically, but they're instantly memorable. Some of them even ape almost directly from other songs, like Elecman Stage. Is literally just the chords from a Journey song.
Yeah.
But I love it when game music is able to kind of reinterpret passages from popular music and transform it into something completely different. That's what I love about the Mother series, is that they're able to do that with a lot of stuff, like how the hippie battle theme is very much like a classic, like a 12-bar blues guitar riff. Yeah, which is really, really fun. There's so much stellar work goes into video game soundtracks, and like so many composers have like really made a name for themselves and like carved out a space within like legitimate music circles as just brilliant people, brilliant composers in their own right. Like as many people could probably, or I should say, like, how do I articulate this? There are as many people that regard Nobuo Uematsu's work well as there are people who regard the work of contemporary composers like Hans Zimmer and Tan Dune. Yeah. With the same amount of respect. Like they've really, like I said, they've carved out a space for themselves in legitimate music circles, which is not to say that game music is illegitimate, but the stigma against video game music exists within the music community.
Unfortunately.
And a lot of game composers don't get the credit that they deserve for the really brilliant work that they do. So it was. I think it was. This is a really good talking point, I think, for us to hit on, because there's a lot more that we can dig into later on.
We're gonna have to return.
We're gonna have to return to this. But I think that's kind of all I have to say for now.
There's definitely more I want to mention, but since we're trying to keep these short, we can just do a part 2 of best composers.
Absolutely. So for now, I guess this is the first episode of Bonus Round.
Yes, thank you for listening.
And let us know what you think. If you really like these,
we could work out a weekly schedule or something.
Yeah, we
or
could.
Bi-weekly or something.
If you have any suggestions, that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Not that it's difficult to come up with them, but more so I want to hear what you people who listen to us want to hear us talk about.
Yeah, we can put a poll up on that Twitter thing.
Yeah, and this is a good way and on Facebook too. Mm-hmm. This is a good way for us to kind of talk about game stuff that might not come up on the podcast as often because we're working with a weekly news format a lot of the time. This is a good way maybe to get you a feel for the kind of stuff that we like. What our identities as people who play video games and what our tastes are like. Feel us out a little bit. But I think that for now that's kind of all we have to say about composers. So yes, this has been the first episode of Bonus Round.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and of course, when this comes out, give us your feedback.
Tip your waitress.
Yes, tip your waitress, and pay for video game soundtracks if you really like them.
Yeah,
pay good money for them because people spend a lot of time recording them.
Most of them are bundled on Steam and whatnot. It's not that hard to get them.
Exactly. Bandcamp, a lot of them are on Spotify now.
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Oh yeah, I think I forgot to mention that on the podcast this week, but Capcom just did a giant dump of everything almost. Mm-hmm. Every Mega Man, all the Street Fighters. You got DMC 3 and 4. Yeah, I was very happy about that. Monster Hunter finally. Fuck.
Yikes! Really? That's fucking amazing.
There's actually a Monster Hunter jazz album, so it's all Monster Hunter sounds, all Monster Hunter music done by a full jazz album. It is so good.
That's fantastic. Amazing. Just holy shit.
Yes.
Okay, well then there we go. Video game soundtracks and composers need love, and it seems like people are willing to give it. So please give all your love to them and to us as we sign off on this first episode of Bonus Round.
Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much.